Isometric RPGs, the genre that perfected the art of making a hero feel massive while taking up as little screen real estate as possible. These top-down, angled masterpieces have had us squinting just hard enough that every problem is rage-quit-worthy. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 25 best isometric RPGs of all time. Starting off with number 25, it's Wasteland 3, what's kind of an overlooked and somewhat underrated RPG from In Exile. Their first attempt at a throwback Fallout-style RPG, Wasteland 2, was pretty rough around the edges and had an unnecessarily complicated skill system, but Wasteland 3 simplified the RPG stuff, really stepped it up in terms of presentation and crafting a much more interesting story to get immersed in. As far as successors to the OG Fallout games, Wasteland 3 gets closest to the sort of punk rock, screw the world tone of the original games.
The darkies will get
It has a real mean-spirited edge to it, which is what you want in a twisted post-apocalypse game. It's just about in every way a big improvement over Wasteland 2, and proved that In Exile had the chops to make a polished and fully featured RPG.
Hike up, cousins! More Hotlanders coming!
Ah! Ruining our fun. Guess we better finish off the rest of them.
And number 24, it's Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. Owlcat's second go with the Pathfinder license brought us their best game to date. While Pathfinder Kingmaker was a really good first effort, it was also really buggy and super unfocused. It had a frustrating kingdom management mode where a lot of players just automated it to not have to worry about it. Wrath of the Righteous keeps the epic scale and huge amount of player freedom, but focuses the story and gives you real stakes with a demonic invasion and a crusade that you're leading. There's still an annoying side game, but this time it's an army management thing and it's less intrusive than the original Kingmaker. The game looks fantastic for an isometric game. It's gigantic, there's fewer out-of-nowhere difficulty spikes compared to the first game. There are a few. It's an Owlcat game. It's kind of their signature thing at this point, but otherwise it's their best balanced, most purely fun game, and they're actually pretty impressive catalog of RPGs. And number 23 is Hades. The actual RPG-ness of Hades might be called into question, but let's give it a little wiggle room because it is a great game. There's progression systems, and if I don't throw in a few games like this, it's just going to be a tedious rundown of Black Isle, BioWare, and Obsidian games, and variety's the spice of life, okay? Hades, definitely isometric. Much more of an action game / roguelike. Still an RPG, though. There's a story to follow, this persistent progression, and even a relationship system. The core game is all about hacking and slashing monsters and challenging bosses in an impossible mission to escape the underworld. For most players, it's going to take dozens of tries before they successfully escape, and that's when the real Hades starts. What makes this game stand out compared to other roguelikes is the persistence. Your relationship with other characters is always evolving. You're always getting just a little bit stronger with each run, and the game encourages you to keep building your character past the point where a standard roguelike would be done. And, another thing is that it's extremely fun to actually play. That's a big thing. Quite an accomplishment. And number 22 is Super Mario RPG. A lot of traditional RPGs on consoles had top-down views, but comparatively, actually very few had real isometric viewpoints. I know the distinction sounds kind of pointless on a list where 3D games are getting mentions. These don't have true isometric angles if you can rotate the camera freely, but they're close enough, and if I'm going to insert actual JRPGs, I gotta narrow the playing field a little bit here. So for 2D-ish games like this, we're going isometric only. In this game's case, it was to show off all that fancy at the time 3D pre-rendered graphics made using Silicon graphics workstations. Everything the original version of this game was rendered in 3D, then converted to 2D sprites. That's what gives it this sort of distinct claymation quality. A lot of people dismiss this game as baby's first RPG, and it kinda is, but that doesn't make it not an all-time great. It's just so fast-paced and cheerfully chaotic, and it's got this somewhat skill-based battle system that's fairly revolutionary at the time. Constantly mix things up with minigames and weird story turns. It's a great, quick RPG, and the Nintendo Switch remaster is pretty great, even if it makes the already extremely easy original even easier. At number 21 is Divinity Original Sin 2. There's going to be a lot of sequels on this list. Seems like when you're making something as complex and massive as an isometric RPG, it's hard to really nail it the first time out. It often takes a second time for these devs to pull it off, not to undersell Original Sin 1, because it is a very good game, but Original Sin 2 just completely blows it out of the water in ambition, depth, complexity, basically, everything. This is the game that proved Larian is a studio to watch out for. While there were a few old-school RPGs still being made before this one, this is the game that really proved there was room for evolution in what was seen as a stagnant genre, that there were possibilities to really push the envelope. And what makes Original Sin 2 so special is just how reactive it was. It's a CRPG combined with an immersive sim, and with the right knowledge and planning, you can just do some crazy stuff in this game. You can break it over your knee. That doesn't make it easy, though. The first time through can be pretty damn rough before you learn the ins and outs of the game's unique systems, and when things aren't working, it can be a drag. But when they are, the highs are incredibly high. These days it's easy to just kind of dismiss Original Sin as a prototype for Baldur's Gate 3, but this game has its own unique charms, and they deserve some recognition.
I'm not one to let sleeping dogs lie.
And number 20 is Dragon Age Origins. Little bit of a stretch in terms of isometric, but hear me out on this one. The fact this game exists at all is crazy. 2009 was a dire time for CRPGs. The genre had effectively been dead for years at that point. BioWare themselves had mostly moved on from traditional RPGs. Mass Effect was 2007, and the game before that was Jade Empire, which also isn't exactly a standard RPG. So when Origins actually came out, it was a real breath of fresh air. On consoles, it's not really an isometric game at all, but on PC, it's 100% in the classic BioWare mold. Just instead of a D&D, we got a dark and gritty Game of Thrones-inspired world with Marilyn Manson singing over the trailer. EA had no idea how to market this thing, by the way. The game itself it's great, though. It's huge. It's got a memorable cast of party members, a lot of moral choices to make, and the game's defining feature of having unique prologues for every class and race you can play is still impressive now. Like no other RPG has even bothered trying. It just can't be toppled in ambition. It's a real shame that it's effectively the only Dragon Age that is like this. Dragon Age 2 was sabotaged from the start because of EA's mandate that it was made in only a year. Later Dragon Age games are just different. Maybe if BioWare stuck with the series as it would have been Baldur's Gate 3 before Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, BioWare were the ones who made the original Baldur's Gate games. And number 19 is The Age of Decadence, released back in 2015 in the early days of the CRPG revival. This game is often overlooked because of its workmanlike visuals and extreme difficulty, but as far as role-playing games go, the amount of choices you have and real tangible consequences, it's unreal here. Set in a fantasy late-stage Roman Empire, this is a rare game where choosing the combat class is considered hard mode. That's because fighting in this game is extremely dangerous and the actual combat systems are daunting. Playing as a guy who can talk things out and avoid combat it's not just a role-play option, it's practically necessary at times. This is a game that will kick your ass Sometimes it'll put you in an almost unwinnable situation where you just have to swallow your pride and suck it up to survive. Literally, like you have to brown nose. It's a game where dialogue and choices aren't just for role-playing. It's not just about if you want to be a good guy or a bad guy. It's about deciding if you want to survive or not, at least at first. Once you start understanding the ins and outs of how the game works, you can start asserting yourself more, and it's satisfying when you actually do finally hit that point. And number 18 is Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. Obsidian's take on the CRPG is one of the best. It's got incredible isometric art. It's a fascinating and complex world with great characters, an epic fantasy story. Deadfire is like the platonic ideal of a CRPG fantasy game. It's excellent across the board. The only real negative I can give is that it would be better if you had actual ship combat instead of this text-based interface, but that's the only major complaint.
And you're the one who'll be paying me. Ain't had... Listen up, mates. I'm off to spear me a bigger fish.
Everything else is just absolutely stellar. The dungeon crawling is well done. The exploration is fantastic with so many interesting places to explore. The character building has a ton of depth, but it's not so complex it bogs things down. It's just an all-around great RPG that unfortunately got overshadowed by Original Sin 2, even though for some folks, Deadfire is a better game. For me, it's more of a toss-up. There's things I like about both, but Deadfire does deserve more recognition. It's maybe more traditional with its old-school isometric camera, but man, is it good. And number 17, it's Avernum, Escape the Pit. Since 94, Jeff Vogel's the president, basically everything guy behind Spiderweb Software. He's been quietly cranking out amazing RPGs. When the great CRPG drought of the mid-2000s began, Jeff was still out there making his little one-man RPGs like nothing had changed. The man has put out some fantastic games through the years, and while they may not look like much, they're great games with fun and surprisingly intuitive battle systems, tons of player choice, and expression and massive worlds to explore. Almost all of his games are of similar quality, but there's one that it's still my favorite of them. It's the first Avernum. Set in an underground prison colony where enemies of the Empire are dumped, it's up to you to survive and, like the title says, escape the pit. It's such a simple goal, and the game gives you multiple ways to complete it. It's hard to fully articulate what makes Spiderweb Software games so good. You just kind of have to try them yourself with an open mind because it does take some time to get past the rudimentary graphics. It's there, though. It's there. I promise you. And number 16, Megaman Battle Network 3. Didn't expect to see a Game Boy Advance game show up on a list of mostly CRPGs, but that's just how we roll here. I feel like these games are a mostly forgotten about thing these days when you talk about Mega Man. But back in their heyday, they were huge hits. The entire series is pretty solid, but the general consensus is Battle Network 3 is the best of the bunch. It's the biggest, has the most build variety, and an absolutely massive post-game that's longer than the standard game itself. What makes Battle Network so great is the battle system. It's brilliant. There's nothing else out there quite like it. They combine a card-based system with action in a way that's just incredible. And in this third game, they really have the whole thing figured out. You have all these crazy kinds of synergies and fun powers to keep things constantly entertaining. The actual isometric parts of the game aren't bad or anything. The story's mostly kiddie anime stuff, though. But the battle system, man, it is great. And number 15 is Shadowrun Dragonfall, another number 2 in a list full of number 2s. And no, I'm not calling it shit, anything but actually. Dragonfall is just the second game in the Shadowrun trilogy, made up of the proof of concept Shadowrun Returns, which is by far the weakest game in the series, then Dragonfall, which is excellent, followed by Hong Kong, which is very good, but I think Dragonfall beats it out, maybe narrowly, just enough in terms of memorable characters and story. It combines cyberpunk with fantasy. It's a very weird universe, but that's also what gives it so much character. As far as CRPGs go, these games are a lot more linear and streamlined. They're mostly split up into a series of missions that you have to accomplish, but the mechanics are super solid, and the setting it's interesting and unique. Dragonfall takes place in Berlin, which I don't think we've ever seen in any other cyberpunk-style game, and the writing is just excellent from top to bottom. There's an actually interesting moral dilemma at the center of it. It's a smaller game than any of these other 100-hour epics, and it might not actually go that distance per se, but that might actually not be a bad thing depending on what you're looking for. At number 14 is Arcanum of Steamworks and Magick Obscura. This is an extremely ambitious RPG from 2001. It's deeply flawed in a lot of ways, but it's a classic and one of the all-time greats of the RPG genre. Set in the fantasy equivalent of the Industrial Revolution, the setting alone makes it one of the most interesting isometric RPGs of all time. Basically, it's Fallout in gameplay with a much bigger, more complex world. Magic and technology are constantly at odds in this world. In fact, they literally don't work in each other's presence. If you learn too much technology or magic will weaken, while technology is often disrupted by magic energy. All sounds like it could be pretty broad, but the writing and world building is super interesting, as is the central mystery plot of the game. It stretches on maybe a little too long, has a little too many side plots, but the ultimate resolution is just one of the best in any RPG. The game isn't an easy one to recommend these days. It's still buggy, even after numerous fan patches. The balance is all out of whack. There's signs of unfinished or missing content all over the place if you're looking for it. And the actual controls and interface, they're pretty archaic by today's standards. It's still one of the most fascinating RPGs ever, though. And if you're willing to overlook its problems, it's one of the most rewarding RPGs ever made. At number 13 is Disco Elysium. Far from a traditional RPG, this one doesn't have any actual combat in it, but still manages to be one of the best RPGs of all time. Set in a little more of a city block of a fictional city, you play as a drunk detective in way over his head trying to solve a mystery of a murder before tensions bubble up and get out of control. The city's a tinderbox ready to explode, and you're the only one who can stop it if you can survive getting your tie off the ceiling fan. Basically, instead of your standard RPG, Disco Elysium is a constant series of skill checks, whether you pass or fail, sets whether you live, die, or just humiliate yourself in new and exciting ways.
Them and become an advanced racist.
The game encourages you to act as outrageously as possible and actually makes fun of you if you pick the boring options. It's a funny game, actually one of the funnier ones I've played, but it's also deeply sad in a way few games manage to do. The real star of the show is the writing, which is idiosyncratic to the extreme. If it were bad, the game would be absolutely insufferable, but it's all funny and insightful, even challenging, and it's so much so that it just works. It makes for a game that's both intensely strange and very relatable. And number 12 is Skies of Arcadia Legends, talking specifically about the Legends version of the game that got released on the GameCube that significantly lowered the density of random encounters from the Dreamcast version. They're both classics, but if you're going to play one, play the GameCube one. This old-school-inspired JRPG is just a rollicking good time. It doesn't have the production values of Final Fantasy VII or the depth of something like Xenogears, but it makes up for it with earnestness and a lot of fun. It's just a cool world to be in, full of sky pirates and floating islands and over-the-top characters. The story moves at a brisk pace, the dungeons are fun to explore, the characters are likable, and exploring the world on a flying ship is just a really fun idea. It doesn't really excel at any one specific thing, but it comes together to create an all-time classic, a true game that is bigger than the sum of its parts. And number 11 is Path of Exile, a time for some action RPGs to get their due, right? These things are relentlessly isometric, and that doesn't change even when they're fully rendered in 3D. Path of Exile is clearly inspired by Diablo 2. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was the mission statement, to make a game more like Diablo 2 back when Blizzard was making things go in a different direction with Diablo 3. And they definitely got the tone, the grim dark tone, correct. The slower gameplay, the focusing on upgrading your loot rather than constantly getting legendary drops, the extremely complicated skill tree that's become infamous for the number crunching and planning required for making viable late game builds. Path of Exile is a thinking man's Diablo, or if you're being less generous, the crazy man's By the end game, Path of Exile does get unforgiving as hell, but just playing through the standard campaign isn't so bad. If you're in for the long haul, then man, the amount of content you're getting, it's just insane. They've been consistently updating the game for 10 years now, and the amount of stuff you can get up to here is just mind-boggling. And number 10 is Vagrant Story. This 2000s RPG from Square Enix is such an anomaly, it's hard to describe really what it even is. You just kind of have to see it in action. It's a cross between Metal Gear Solid, a dungeon crawler, and Hamlet. And that's not just because one of the main villains is literally named Guildenstern. The game has style to spare, illustrated by its lavish in-game prologue, which seamlessly cuts between gameplay and cutscenes well before that sort of thing became commonplace. The combat system is very weird, takes a while to get your head around it, but it's also not nearly as punishing as it seems at first. As long as you keep comboing, you'll eventually start doing some big damage, no matter how many times it seems like you're whiffing it. The real draw here is the visuals and story, which are obviously pretty dated at this point. It's a game from the year 2000 on the original PlayStation, but it's just such a unique style. It manages to transcend. I'd love to see an indie game that goes for like this kind of low poly look. I haven't really seen this exact style in an indie game. I would love to see it, though. I mean, Vagrant Story is an unusual game. It can be difficult to grasp at first, but if you stick with it, it's one of the best RPGs of all time. And number 9 is Fallout 2. You know it was eventually going to come here. It's a bigger, crazier version of the first game. It's got everything you could want in a CRPG. Lots of world to explore, tons of side quests to complete, a big moral choice, actually multiple big moral choices to make, all wrapped up in the viciously satirical world of Fallout. Sure, the opening temple section it's tedious, but once you actually get into the main meat of the game, Fallout 2 still holds up as an excellent RPG. There's not a lot mechanically different from Fallout 2, its sequel. It's just a bigger game that introduces one of the all-time great video game bad guys in the Enclave. For certain Fallout fans, 2 goes a little too heavy on the humor, which I get, but otherwise, honestly, it's as good, if not better, than the original. And number 8 is Earthbound, which is actually isometric. I mean, look at the buildings. It's not a full 45-degree tilt. It's more like 30, but that's close enough. This SNES RPG might not have set the world on fire back in 1995, but if you knew the level of cult fan base it was going to build over the years and you were on the development staff back then, I'm sure something would have felt very different. This game's got tons of charm, and that's why it's endured for so long. Mechanically, it's super basic. The combat is straightforward as hell. Inventory management can be a chore. Not the most streamlined game, but the music, the Americana setting, which is just like evocative of nostalgia in a way few things are. The goofball enemies, the weirdo characters you're always meeting, it's just an all-around likable game. There's still nothing else quite like it. There are a lot of games that are clearly Earthbound inspired. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Undertale, even though visually speaking, they're fairly different. If one didn't happen, the other wouldn't have happened. Still, those games always go in their own direction. Earthbound, it just is. And number 7 is Champions of Norrath. There's some pretty great action RPGs on the PS2 that were spin-offs of Baldur's Gate called Dark Alliance. But the actual best game in this vaguely connected series is Champions of Norrath, an EverQuest-based action RPG that's bigger, better, and all around a lot more fun than the Dark Alliance games, even though it's essentially Dark Alliance 3. As far as the story goes, it's nothing special. EverQuest just has about the most generic fantasy setting imaginable, but all the hacking and slashing has never been better.
My mana's depleted.
Each character class is fun to play as, the game's massive, tons of unique environments and enemies, the loot, simple and satisfying. When it comes to ARPGs on consoles, they just don't get a lot better than this. At number 6 is Baldur's Gate 3. What's left to say about Baldur's Gate 3 at this point? It's a legitimate phenomenon. Its success left big chunks of the game industry shook. The game is just so big, so complex, so visually stunning that many were left thinking that literally nobody could make a game this good, at least not somebody else. All of the hand-wringing was absurd. I mean, it's a good video game, guys. It's excellent. The amount of player freedom it allows is incredible, and the world they built here is so dense and interesting. You can spend hours exploring relatively small locations and still end up missing things. The complexity can even sometimes be a problem. And the plot does kind of meander in the final act, like Larian games tend to do, but mechanically, it's one of the best RPGs of all time, with a fantastic cast of characters and some stunning environmental design. At number 5 is Ultima 7, The Black Gate. Gotta pay respect to the classics here. Going all the way back to 1992 for this one, with the original RPG with immersive sim elements that came out before the term immersive sim was even a thing. Often considered the best of the Ultima series, this game can be tough to go back to and play today. The real-time battle system's awkward, to say the very least. But the story, the exploration, and it's all still incredible world design. It's a journey worth taking, okay? The story especially props this one up with a murder mystery, the depth of the characters, and the writing. For a game this old, there's some interesting ideas presented here, as well as one of the most iconic video game bad guys of all time with the introduction of the Guardian. It is tough to go back to, but it deserves its flowers for being way ahead of its time when it came out. And number 4 is Diablo 2, the all-time great action RPG. This is the game that perfected the formula with great classes, amazing art, sound design, and music. Oh, and the endlessly addicting gameplay loop, that too. From top to bottom, the presentation at the time was stellar. The remaster, somehow just as impressive. You smack hundreds of thousands of monsters, you get loot, you level up, you go back to the base, dump trash, slot in gems. That's Diablo, and it just works. Later Diablo games have their own charms, and they hold up in their own way, but none of them manage to quite measure up to Diablo 2. Not because they fall short, but because Diablo 2 is its own thing, and it's just that good. And number 3 is Fallout. The original is still the all-time great. Fallout 2 is amazing, of course, but Fallout 1 is where it all started, and they got it pretty much perfect on the first try. This is the game that introduces us to the brutal world of Fallout, and it does not pull any punches, leaning in hard to the unforgiving satire that the series is known for. Fallout 1 is gloomy and a dangerous feeling game. Right from the beginning, you're on the clock. Your mission is to find a new water chip, or everyone in your vault will die, and if too much real time passes, it actually happens. It's not just an empty threat. If you're too slow, then you will fail the main mission. Fallout 1 is a lot more focused than the freewheeling Fallout 2, with a much more consistently somber mood. How the player can go about achieving their objective, it's up to them, and there is no morality system in the game, it's just choices and consequences. At number 2, it's Planescape Torment, set in the metaphysical world of Planescape, the most out there of all the D&D settings, except for maybe Spelljammer, the one where you fly magic spaceships. That might be crazier. Torment's a wild game, though. This is the game that inspired Disco Elysium. It's a lot more literary in its approach to storytelling, with huge chunks of prose wherever you go. Combat is in the game, but it's minimal. The focus here was on storytelling and dialogue trees, and in a unique turn for one of these games, you do play as a specific character, the Nameless One, a dude that looks like Conan crossed with Frankenstein on a mission to figure out who you are and eventually a way to end the curse of immortality. Yeah, you play as a guy who can't die. Every time you'd normally hit a game over with this game, you just wake up at the morgue. And that's not just a story thing. Sometimes dying can help you solve quests. Some of the most memorable characters in all of the CRPGs are in this thing, like Morte, the floating skull, Nordum, the Mordrin, a robot looking for identity, or the psychotic Ignis. The real draw of Planescape is the story and writing, so if you're not interested in reading a ton of text, this game's probably going to be kind of a drag, but the writing is excellent, and the story is still one of the best of all time, so while the actual combat's kind of lacking, everything else about it's top-notch. And finally, at number 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Amn. This is the iconic isometric RPG and the platonic ideal of the CRPG. Baldur's Gate 1 was a great first game, but it felt a little bare bones, a little empty. The companions were mostly one note, with very little stories to tell. There were hardly any dungeons or satisfying loot. Baldur's Gate 2 expands on and improves just about everything from the first. The world is bigger, there's side quests, there's secrets you can uncover everywhere. The story is more exciting, anchored by an all-time great performance from David Warner. The city of Amn is so much fun to explore, still one of the best cities ever put into an RPG, and the art and music on display here, still some of the best in RPGs.
What a fight. Very well.
You're dealing with advanced Dungeons and Dragons for the rules, which can take some getting used to, but the game on the whole isn't too difficult, so you're free to make some mistakes and not create the most perfectly optimized characters. It's just a fantastic and fully featured isometric RPG that holds up remarkably well even now. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.